Single moms like you shouldn't be on planes, especially looking like that. The words cut through the cabin like a cold slap, sharp and humiliating. All she had done was board the plane with her baby. And now, just minutes into the flight, Laura Miller already wished she could vanish. Laura was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went, not because she tried to, but because she simply couldn't help it. With porcelain skin, a gently curved figure, long, wavy blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, and piercing blue eyes that once dreamed of modeling runways, she looked like someone who had her life together. Except she didn't. She was tired, the kind of tired that didn't show in Instagram pictures. She wore a soft, cream-colored knit dress that hugged her body tastefully, not provocatively, but still people stared. Not admiringly, judgmentally. Laura was 27, a single mom, and every minute of her day was devoted to her 10-month-old son, Noah. This flight from Dallas to San Diego was supposed to be a calm return from visiting her elderly mother. But calm wasn't in the cards today. As she stepped into the cabin, cradling Noah with one arm and dragging her small suitcase with the other, she could already feel the eyes, the whispers, the assumptions. Did you see what she's wearing? Bet she's hoping someone upgrades her to first class. That poor baby doesn't deserve a mom like that. Laura's cheeks flushed with heat. She said nothing. Just made her way down the narrow aisle and found her seat 14C economy class next to the window. She sat down gently, rocked Noah in her arms, and tried to breathe. But babies don't care about dignity. Noah began to fuss, not wailing, just that soft, pre-crying whimper that moms know all too well. Laura bounced him slightly, whispering lullabies under her breath. But that wasn't enough for the people around her. The man in 14B, middle-aged, balding, irritated, pulled out his AirPods with a sigh. "This is gonna be a long flight," he muttered, not even trying to hide it. The woman in front of Laura turned around and gave her the kind of look that said, "Control your child or else." And then came the first outburst from row 13A. Could someone ask her to shut that baby up? Some of us paid for peace. Laura's heart sank. Noah was now softly crying, and she knew it was only going to get worse. Her throat tightened. The last thing she needed was a scene. Not again. She'd been through worse cruel looks at restaurants, dismissive attitudes in doctors' offices. But something about being trapped in a pressurized cabin with nowhere to hide made it all feel 100 times heavier. She whispered to her son, "It's okay, baby. Just a few hours." Just a few hours, but the tears were already forming in her eyes. And that's when the man next to her shifted. She had barely looked at him since boarding. He wore a plain gray jacket, jeans, and sneakers. Nothing flashy, just another passenger. But now as he calmly rose to his feet, the entire cabin went silent. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. "Excuse me, everyone." He began, voice firm but steady. "I think we need a reminder of what compassion looks like." Laura blinked, confused. What was happening? The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. From it, he displayed a sleek military identification badge. "I'm Major General Michael Langston, United States Air Force. And I'd like to say something." A ripple of surprise ran through the cabin. This woman beside me is not disturbing anyone. She's doing her best to comfort her child on a public flight like the rest of us. If any of you feel inconvenienced by a baby's cry, maybe it's your empathy that's lacking. Silence. Even Noah had gone quiet. Laura was frozen, unable to move. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted in disbelief. A general. Langston turned slightly toward her, nodding with respect before looking back at the rest of the passengers. "Let me make something else clear," he continued. "Single mothers are among the strongest people I've met in my life. They carry the weight of two parents, often without thanks or support. And when they look like her," he gestured subtly toward Laura, "they get judged twice as hard for no reason." Somewhere in the back, someone cleared their throat awkwardly. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one spoke. Laura's fingers gripped Noah's blanket. Her breath trembled. This wasn't happening. "So unless anyone here outranks me," he added with a half-smile, "I suggest we let this woman fly in peace." And then, like magic, the tension dissolved. People turned away ashamed. A few even nodded in agreement. No more glares, no more whispers. Langston sat back down, calm as ever. Laura looked at him, still stunned. "Thank you," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "You didn't have to. You didn't deserve any of that," he replied quietly. "Being a mother is one of the most important jobs on earth, and people forget that." She smiled and for the first time in a long while felt safe. Not because someone powerful stood up for her, but because someone saw her for who she really was, not a burden, not a stereotype, not a problem. just a mom doing her best. And that was enough. Laura didn't speak for the first few minutes after General Langston sat back down. She couldn't. Her throat was tight with emotion, and her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She clutched Noah a little closer, and to her surprise, he had gone completely silent, as if he too had felt the shift in the air. The man next to her, this calm, composed military officer, had done something she'd never experienced before. He had stood up for her, unprompted. Not to flirt, not for attention, not for praise, just because it was the right thing to do. She turned slightly in her seat and looked at him. He didn't meet her eyes. He was staring forward as if nothing had happened, as if that entire moment of confrontation had just been a minor ripple in his day. But for her, it had changed everything. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. That wasn't just kind, it was brave. Langston finally turned his head toward her, giving a small, almost fatherly smile. "You don't need bravery when you're doing what's right," he replied softly. "But it's nice to be appreciated." Laura laughed, just a breathy sound that surprised even herself. "You made everyone shut up. That's practically a miracle." He chuckled. "I've been told I have a commanding presence." She let out a small sigh, and for the first time since the flight began, she relaxed back into her seat. Noah had drifted off to sleep on her chest, his tiny hand clutching the neckline of her dress. She adjusted the blanket gently around him. "I'm Laura," she offered, glancing sideways. "Laura Miller." "Michael Langston," he replied, extending his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm but not overpowering. There was something grounding about it, something safe. The cabin had settled now. No more whispers, no more side glances. In fact, several passengers were pretending to read magazines or watch their screens as if nothing had happened. But Laura could feel it, the shame in the air, the guilt. It clung to them like turbulence. "You didn't have to say all that," she said after a pause. "I've gotten used to the stares, the judgments. I usually just try to survive it." Langston looked at her, his expression gentle but unwavering. "That's the problem," he said. "Women like you shouldn't have to survive society's rudeness. You're doing something noble raising a child alone. People should be applauding you, not shaming you." Those words broke something in her, a small invisible wall she didn't even realize she had built around herself. "Most people don't see that," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "They just see a young woman with a baby. They assume I'm irresponsible, that I'm looking for handouts, that I must have made a mess of my life." She looked down at Noah, now snoring gently. "They don't know I work 2 jobs, or that my ex left when I was 4 months pregnant, or that I haven't slept more than 5 hours straight in almost a year." Langston nodded slowly. "You shouldn't have to justify yourself to anyone. But for what it's worth, I do see you." Those words, "I do see you," hit her harder than she expected. No one had said that to her in years, maybe ever. A lump formed in her throat. She blinked quickly, trying to keep her emotions from spilling over. "Sorry," she whispered, wiping her cheek. "I don't cry in front of strangers." "I'm not a stranger anymore," he said simply. "I'm someone who respects you." Silence settled between them, but this time it was warm, like a blanket, not a wall. Laura's mind drifted to the first time she held Noah. She'd been alone in that delivery room. No one waiting outside, no celebration. Just her and this tiny wailing creature who depended on her for everything. The nurses had called her brave, but most days she didn't feel brave. She just felt exhausted. Until now. Michael's words had unearthed something buried deep, some forgotten sense of dignity. "Can I ask you something?" she said, voice quieter now. "Why did you do it? Really?" He looked at her thoughtful. "Because I watched my own mother raise 3 kids alone after my dad died," he said. "She worked nights at a diner, got us all through college, never asked for help, never got the respect she deserved." "You remind me of her." Laura swallowed the lump in her throat again. "Then she must have been amazing." "She was," he said with a nod. "And so are you." The words hung in the air, soft and powerful. For the rest of the flight, they didn't speak much. But it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Every now and then, Laura would glance over and find Michael quietly working on something in a worn leather notebook. She wanted to ask what it was, but somehow she knew it didn't matter. What mattered was that in a world that often made her feel small, invisible, and judged, someone had seen her and treated her like she mattered. The minutes passed slowly, but with an unexpected sense of calm. Laura leaned back slightly, still holding Noah, her arm gently aching from the weight of him, but she didn't care. He was asleep, peaceful, and she was finally allowed to just Breathe. Beside her, Michael Langston had returned to his small leather-bound notebook. The pen in his hand moved with quiet certainty, sketching lines, or perhaps words Laura couldn't quite tell from her angle. But she found herself fascinated by the way he carried himself. Not loud, not dominant, just steady. Like someone who had stood in a storm so often the wind no longer scared him. She watched him for a moment longer before whispering, "You right?" Michael glanced over and smiled softly. "Old habit. Started when I was a cadet. I journal everything, missions, conversations, thoughts. Helps keep my mind clean." Laura tilted her head. "What do you write about today?" He paused. "Today," he repeated. "Today I'm writing about a young woman who reminded me of the kind of strength people overlook far too often." She blinked. Her throat tightened again, but she didn't cry this time. She just smiled. A small, grateful smile. Suddenly, a voice behind them spoke up. "Excuse me." Laura turned in surprise. It was the woman from the row behind one of the passengers who had earlier glanced at her with disdain. She was in her mid-50s, stern-faced, short-hair business blazer, still buttoned. The woman looked uncomfortable, almost guilty. "I wanted to apologize. I judged you the moment you walked in. I thought she caught herself. Well, I didn't think, and I'm sorry for that." Laura was stunned. She didn't know what to say. But Michael nodded in acknowledgement, and Laura simply replied, "Thank you." The woman gave a small nod, then returned to her seat. It was only a few words, but to Laura it was seismic. It was validation. Someone had admitted they were wrong, and that meant the world. She glanced again at Michael. "Did you expect that?" she asked, quiet amusement in her voice. "People surprise me every day," he said, "for better or worse." Laura shifted slightly, making sure Noah was still comfortable. Then she took a breath and decided to ask the question that had been sitting with her ever since he introduced himself. "You said your mom raised you alone?" she asked gently. Michael nodded, closing his notebook. "My father died in a training accident when I was 7. My mother had 3 of us. She worked double shifts at a diner and still found time to sew Halloween costumes, teach us about honor, discipline, kindness." He looked down at his own hands. "She passed 5 years ago, but everything I am came from her." Laura's voice was soft. "She sounds like someone I wish I could have known." "I think," he said, "you would have reminded her of herself." The words warmed her more than she could say. They fell into silence again, but it was the kind of silence that was full, not empty. Laura looked out the window. The sun was beginning to dip behind the clouds, casting golden light across the airplane wing. The sky outside was soft and pink, peaceful like the inside of a lullaby. She thought about the journey here, how she'd nearly canceled the trip, how she had almost decided it wasn't worth dragging Noah across states being stared at, struggling through security. But now she knew she had to be here, not just for her mom, but for herself, for this moment. It reminded her that good people still existed. A flight attendant passed by and offered her a bottle of water. Laura accepted it with a grateful smile. But then she noticed something odd. The attendant gave her a small nod, almost respectful. Word must have spread. She turned to Michael. "I think you scared the crew." He chuckled. "I just reminded them who's really in charge around here." Laura laughed softly, covering her mouth so as not to wake Noah. Then her smile faded slightly as she looked down at her baby. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to be terrified that I wouldn't be enough for him, that growing up without a father would damage him somehow, that I would always be seen as incomplete." Michael looked at her with steady eyes. "But now?" he asked. She smiled again. "Now I think I might be exactly what he needs." He nodded once. "He's lucky. You're not raising him alone. You're raising him with love. That's more than most kids get." A few rows up, someone was watching them, Laura noticed. It was the man who had muttered earlier about long flights. He was now unusually quiet, and when Laura caught his gaze, he actually looked away ashamed. Another small victory. The rest of the flight passed without incident. But everything had shifted. The atmosphere was different. The judgment had faded into background noise. Laura was no longer the object of whispers. She was the woman sitting beside the general. And more importantly, she was seen. As the seatbelt sign lit up for descent, Laura reached into her diaper bag and pulled out a small, neatly folded piece of paper. She scribbled something quickly and slipped it into the back of the leather notebook while Michael wasn't looking. When he noticed, he raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" "A thank you," she said, "for the notebook." "I don't give away my notes," he said, half joking. "You didn't," she replied. "Just check the last page when you get home." He smiled knowingly, but said nothing more. And as the plane began its descent into San Diego, Laura looked out the window feeling stronger than she had in a long, long time. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker as the plane began its final descent. Laura barely heard the words, something about weather and arrival time, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't dreading the landing. She glanced down at Noah. He was still asleep, his lips parted in that soft, perfect way only babies manage. His fingers gripped her dress like he was holding onto her soul. Michael was placing his notebook back into his carry-on. He moved without urgency but with purpose, the kind of movements that came from a life of precision. Laura admired that. She didn't know how many hours he had spent in war zones or command centers, but somehow he had managed to hold on to his humanity. The plane tilted slightly. The engines roared lower. The wheels were out. Laura looked out the window. San Diego was shimmering beneath the clouds bathed in late afternoon light, the city she called home. And for the first time it felt like a homecoming instead of a return. Michael looked over. First time flying with Noah. Laura smiled. First time since he was born. I used to travel a lot before work conferences. But this, she gestured to the sleeping child, this is a whole new world. He nodded with a warm smile. You handled it better than most seasoned travelers. She gave him a look. You didn't hear me crying in the airport bathroom 30 minutes before boarding. He chuckled, still counts. The tires screeched lightly as the plane touched down. A gentle jolt, then a soft glide. The engines reversed, the cabin shifted forward, and soon they were coasting. Applause broke out somewhere in the back. Laura had always found that strange clapping for pilots, but today it felt symbolic. As if the entire cabin was exhaling, so was she. As they taxied to the gate, Laura began collecting Noah's things, the bottle, the toy giraffe, the small pacifier tucked between the seats. Michael reached down and picked up the blanket she hadn't noticed had fallen. Thanks, she said, tucking it into the diaper bag. Of course. A few rows ahead, passengers began standing up retrieving luggage. The overhead bins creaked open one by one. The flight was over, but something in Laura didn't want it to end. Not because she feared what waited outside, but because she hadn't felt this kind of stillness in months. She wanted to remember it, hold on to it. Michael stood up and reached for her bag without asking. He placed it in the aisle gently, then offered a hand as she rose. She shifted Noah carefully into her arms and stood. Their faces were now eye to eye. Thank you, she said for the 100th time. For everything. I know you probably get that a lot, but he shook his head, not like this. You didn't just defend me, she continued. You gave me space to breathe, to feel like I'm not broken. Michael's expression softened. You were never broken, Laura, just underestimated. The words settled into her chest like a healing balm. She would remember them for the rest of her life. The aisle began to move. Row by row, passengers filed out. Michael looked toward the front, then back to her. I'll go ahead and clear the way, he said, so you're not jostled with the baby. He stepped into the aisle, giving her one final nod before disappearing into the crowd. Laura watched him go. And in that moment, something happened, something she didn't expect. The woman from earlier, the one who had apologized, stood in the aisle. But before walking off, she turned back toward Laura. You're stronger than you know, she said quietly. Laura nodded, stunned. Behind her, the man who had scoffed at the beginning of the flight, he simply tipped his head with a shame-faced half-smile. No words, but his eyes said enough. And just like that, Laura realized something that made her eyes well up again. People had changed, not dramatically, not like a movie scene, but just enough. Michael's act hadn't only protected her, it had shifted something deeper. He had recalibrated the entire cabin's empathy, even if just slightly. And now, she could feel it in the way they looked at her. No longer judgmental, but curious, respectful, quietly reverent. As she stepped out of the plane, sunlight spilled onto the jet bridge. She adjusted Noah in her arms and straightened her back. She didn't walk fast. She didn't look down. She walked off that plane taller than she had boarded. Laura moved through the terminal slowly, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby pressed against her chest. The wheels of her small carry-on rolled quietly behind her as she approached the baggage claim area. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor, echoing between the white airport walls. Outside, San Diego was warming into a soft golden hour. Inside, Laura was still wrapped in the silence that had followed her off the plane, and almost wholly quiet, as if her soul were walking a few paces behind her, catching up after everything. She adjusted Noah slightly in her arms. He stirred for a moment, then settled again with a sigh. She smiled. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she wasn't counting down to the next breakdown. But her calm didn't last long. As she rounded the corner toward the baggage carousel, she saw a man in a tan vest and airport staff badge arguing with a woman at the carousel belt. The woman was elderly, clearly disoriented, clutching a purse to her chest. Her voice was trembling. I, I was told my daughter would be here. She said she'd send someone to meet me. The airport employee was curt. Ma'am, if you don't have a rideshare confirmation or pickup number, I can't help you. This is for private pickups, not wandering guests. Laura slowed. Something about the tone twisted her gut. Please, the older woman stammered. I don't know how to use the app. My phone died and... The man interrupted. Ma'am, you can't stand here. Please step to the side. People were walking around the scene as if nothing were happening. Laura watched in disbelief. The woman wasn't dangerous. She was scared. Alone. Just like Laura had felt not so long ago. She hesitated for a moment. Should she step in? Before she could act, someone else beat her to it. A voice rang out, calm, steady, unmistakable. That won't be necessary. Laura blinked and turned. There he was. General Michael Langston. He was walking calmly toward the scene, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. Sir, this doesn't concern you, the airport employee said quickly, suddenly flustered. Michael reached into his jacket, pulled out a different ID card this time, a federal pass of some kind. He held it up just long enough for the man to see. Actually, it does. Step aside. The worker looked at him, glanced at the ID, and without another word backed away. Michael stepped gently toward the elderly woman and crouched slightly to meet her eyes. Miss M, what's your name? Eleanor, she whispered, her voice shaking. Well, Eleanor, he said kindly, you're not alone anymore. Let's find you a seat and we'll call your daughter together. All right. She nodded, her relief visible. Laura stood frozen a few feet away, watching, amazed. Michael turned, clearly aware of her presence now, but not surprised. Laura, he said, as if they were picking up a conversation they'd never stopped. You made it off the plane without a scratch. She smiled, barely. He turned back to Eleanor, now guiding her gently to a bench nearby. Laura approached slowly, shifting Noah's weight in her arms. Michael looked up. You always make dramatic exits at airports. Only when they involve generals and forgotten mothers, she said with a half smile. Michael chuckled and waved for her to sit beside them. As Eleanor rested on the bench, Michael took out a sleek smartphone and dialed a number Eleanor dictated from memory. He handed her the phone once it rang. Laura watched her quietly speak to someone, her daughter most likely, and then breathe a sigh of relief. She's on her way, Eleanor said gratefully. Thank you. Both. Happy to help, Laura said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. As Eleanor clutched her purse and stared at her lap, Laura turned to Michael. How do you do it? She asked. How do you always know when to step in? I mean, it's not like you're on duty. Michael looked at her, his expression serious now. We're always on duty when it comes to dignity, he said. That's something my mother taught me long before I wore a uniform. Laura felt her chest tighten again. Funny, that's something I want to teach Noah, but I don't always feel strong enough to live it. You don't have to be strong all the time, he said. You just have to be aware. And when you see someone in need, do what you can. That's more than enough. They sat in silence for a while, the terminal bustling softly around them. Eventually, a young woman came rushing toward them, Eleanor's daughter, tearful, hugging her mother tightly, thanking them both over and over. Michael waved it off. Laura stood, her diaper bag slung over one shoulder, her baby still asleep. You always show up just when I need a reminder of what decent people look like, she said, her voice quiet. It's not a coincidence, he replied. Sometimes we cross paths with people not just to help them, but to remind ourselves who we are. And who am I? She asked gently. You're a mother, he said, and you're doing it damn well. Laura smiled, her heart full. Goodbye, General. Goodbye, Miss Miller. And with that, they parted again. But this time, Laura walked away, not just taller. She walked away with something even more valuable, the quiet certainty that she would be okay. By the time Laura pulled into her driveway, the sky was turning lavender. The early evening light stretched long shadows across the quiet street, and the scent of jasmine drifted on the breeze. Her little blue Corolla hummed to a stop in front of the small townhouse she rented on a quiet cul-de-sac in Claremont. Noah was still asleep in his car seat, his chubby cheeks rising and falling with every breath. Laura looked at him for a moment, almost not wanting to move. That flight had been long, but the journey it represented, emotional, internal, was even longer. She stepped out of the car slowly, her muscles stiff from hours of holding, soothing tensing. She stretched her back, rolled her shoulders, and opened the back door to unbuckle her son. One arm slid gently under his body. The other grabbed the diaper bag. As she turned toward her front door, she stopped. There was something on the doormat. At first, she thought it was just a flyer, maybe a local pizza deal or another We Buy Houses cash leaflet. But as she got closer, she saw it was an envelope. Simple, white, her name written in strong, even handwriting across the front. Laura Miller. No stamp, no address, just her name. She bent down and picked it up cautiously. Her heart skipped. Was this from him? Holding Noah with one arm, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of lavender-scented wipes and vanilla candles greeted her. The apartment was still full of laundry waiting to be folded, still full of responsibilities. But for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like hers. She settled Noah into his crib, kissed his forehead, and tiptoed out of the room. Then she returned to the envelope and carefully tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her breath caught as she unfolded it. Laura, I meant to leave this at the gate, but you disappeared before I had the chance. There are 1,000 things I could say, but I'll keep it simple. You reminded me of the kind of strength I once believed in. Quiet strength. The kind that doesn't ask to be admired, but simply refuses to break. People like you are why I keep believing in this country. I hope one day Noah will read this. And I hope when he does, he'll know he was raised by someone who refused to let the world turn her into a shadow of herself. Thank you for letting me witness that. Michael Langston. Laura stared at the words, her hands trembling. He had written this before they even said goodbye, before they spoke at the terminal. He'd felt this before any of that. She sat down at the edge of the couch, heart-pounding, tears building. It wasn't a love letter, not in the romantic sense. It was something deeper. It was validation. Not for being beautiful, not for being quiet, not for enduring pain, but for fighting silently, for being a mother when it was hardest, for surviving with grace. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it between the pages of a photo album that sat on her bookshelf. One day when Noah was old enough to understand, she'd show it to him. Tell him the story, not just about the flight, but about the moment she began to see herself again. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mom. Glad you made it home safe. Give Noah a kiss from Grandma. She smiled and texted back. Then impulsively, she opened her messages again and began typing something new. Hi, Michael. I got your letter. Thank you. You have no idea what it meant to me. Laura. She hesitated. Did she really want to send it? She didn't even know if she still had his number. The one he scribbled in her notebook before they deboarded right beneath her folded thank you note. But yes, she hit send. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't overthink it. Didn't analyze, didn't doubt. She just felt whole. And that was enough. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the baby monitor. Laura stood in the kitchen, fingers wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. The soft golden light from her dining room spilled across the hardwood floor, but her eyes weren't focused on the room. They were on her phone. The message she'd sent to Michael 2 hours ago sat unread. Hi, Michael, I got your letter. Thank you. You have no idea what it meant to me. Laura. She didn't know why she kept staring at it. Maybe she expected it to vanish, or maybe part of her hoped he'd reply right away. But this wasn't a movie, and men like Michael didn't seem like the type to text back quickly, if at all. She turned the screen off, set the phone down, and walked to the window. The night air outside was cool. The streetlights had flickered on. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then fell silent again. She exhaled long and slow. Then the phone lit up. Buzz! Her heart jumped. She rushed back to it. Michael Langston. I meant every word, Laura. May I take you out to dinner sometime? You deserve a meal you don't have to reheat 3 times before finishing. She stared at the screen, blinking. Was this real? Another message came in. I know that's forward, but if you say no, I'll just write another letter. Laura laughed out loud. A quiet, stunned laugh. She sat down on the couch, hands still wrapped around the phone. What was this? She read the message again. It wasn't flirtatious, it wasn't transactional. It was human, gentle, direct. And after everything, after months of invisibility, of being treated like a burden, a stereotype, a too young, too alone, too much. Mom, this felt like oxygen. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Laura, okay, but only if I can wear something that doesn't have spit up on it. A moment later, the 3 dots appeared. Michael, deal. Tomorrow evening, I'll pick a quiet place. No judgment. Just food, fresh air, and no baby monitors. They met at a small restaurant tucked away near the water. It wasn't fancy, but it had string lights on the patio and the kind of soft jazz that didn't try too hard to impress. The staff all greeted Michael by name. When Laura arrived, she wore a soft blue dress, not tight, not flashy, but it caught the breeze just right and made her feel like herself again. Her hair was loose. She hadn't worn heels in almost a year, but she managed. Michael stood as she approached. He looked the same calm, commanding, but something in his eyes softened when he saw her. "You clean up nice, General," she teased. "You make it very hard to keep my composure," he replied. They sat at a small table near the edge of the patio where they could see the marina just beyond the railing. The sky was dark now with stars peeking through. Boats bobbed in silence. They didn't talk about politics or war. They talked about books, about music, about the way the ocean sounds different after midnight. "Do you miss being on active duty?" she asked at one point. Michael sipped his wine. "Some days, but not like before. I miss the clarity, the way you know exactly what your job is. Out here," he looked around, "life's messier. The rules aren't always clear. But you still carry yourself like you're in uniform," she said. "And you carry yourself like you've been leading troops your whole life," he replied. She blushed. "You mean carrying a diaper bag?" "I mean leading with grace under pressure without applause," he said. "I'd take a soldier like that any day." Their meals arrived. They ate slowly. Michael listened with full attention as she told him about her work as a freelance copywriter, how she squeezed in gigs between feedings and naps, how she used to write poems once, but now most of her words were about shampoo and mattress ads. He didn't look bored. He looked captivated. "Do you miss poetry?" he asked. She nodded. "More than I admit. I used to write about love. Now I write about lumber support." He laughed. "Write something for me," he said. "Right now." "Das No," he said. "Whenever it feels honest. I'd like to read your real words someday." She bit her lip. "That's a big thing to ask." "You trusted me on that plane," he said. "That was a bigger thing." The dessert came and they shared it, a lemon tart, delicate and sweet. Laura barely noticed the taste. She was too full from something else, from being seen, heard, cherished even. When they stood to leave, he didn't try to kiss her. He didn't even brush her hand. He simply walked her to her car and waited until she was safely inside. "Thank you for tonight," she said softly. "Thank you for answering," he replied. And then he stepped back, nodded once and walked to his own car, his figure bathed in amber streetlight. Laura sat for a moment before starting the engine. The last time someone opened a door for her like that, it had been a lifetime ago. A week passed after the dinner. A week filled with soft messages, voice notes, and the kind of conversation that didn't feel forced. Laura found herself smiling at her phone more often. Not because Michael tried to charm her, but because he never tried too hard. His voice was steady, thoughtful, always ending with a "get some rest" or "give Noah a forehead kiss for me." And one Thursday afternoon, she got a different kind of message. "Michael, I want to show you something. If you're free Saturday morning, just you. Noah can stay with Grandma for a few hours." Laura didn't ask what it was. She just said yes. They met at a quiet park just outside the city. It wasn't crowded, just endless trees, winding gravel paths, and the scent of eucalyptus thick in the breeze. Michael was already there, leaning against a black SUV in a dark gray jacket and jeans. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were serious. "Noah with your mom?" he asked. "Yeah," Laura smiled. "She's over the moon. Finally has her grandbaby time." "Good," he said, "because I need you to walk with me for a bit." He offered his arm. She took it. They didn't speak much as they walked. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was like a hush before a storm of meaning. After 10 minutes, Michael turned off the path and led her to a small clearing. It took Laura a second to realize where they were. There was a bench, a large oak tree, and a single headstone. It was simple, clean, white marble with fresh flowers laid beside it. "Margaret Langston, beloved mother, tireless soul, 1953-2017. She taught him how to stand." Laura stood in place. She didn't know whether to step closer or step back. Michael did both for her. He moved forward, knelt down, and placed a small card on the edge of the headstone. Then he just stayed there, silent, breathing. She waited. Finally, he looked up at her. "I never brought anyone here." "Not even?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "No." "Why me?" Michael stood and looked at the tree above them, its massive limbs swaying softly in the wind. "Because you're the only person I've met in years who reminded me of her." Laura blinked, surprised. He continued, My mother raised three of us after my father's accident. No pension, no help. She never asked for credit, never let anyone tell her she couldn't. She was beautiful, but she never used it. She was strong but soft enough to make you feel safe crying in her arms. And she believed, he said, turning to Laura, that the world didn't owe her anything for doing the right thing. You remind me of that kind of woman. Laura swallowed. Her throat was tight. I'm not that strong, she whispered. Michael stepped closer. Yes, you are. He wasn't trying to flatter her. He was remembering her, as if she'd always been someone worth knowing. Laura crouched beside the bench and looked at the headstone. She sounds like the kind of mom I wish I had. Michael smiled softly. She would have loved you. They sat on the bench in silence. The leaves rustled. A hawk circled far overhead. Laura turned to him after a moment. Why are you really showing me this? Because I didn't want to hide you from this part of me, he said. It's not romantic, it's not easy, but it's real, and you're real. She looked at him. And maybe he added, because I need to know that if I ever fall again, someone will still see me. Laura reached out slowly, fingers brushing the back of his hand. I see you, she said. They stayed like that for a long while, two people with different paths, different timelines, but the same aching need to be understood. Before they left, Laura stood alone for a moment beside Margaret's headstone. Thank you, she whispered, for raising a man who knows how to make a woman feel unforgotten. On the drive home, Laura watched the trees blur past her window, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was walking alone. Saturday morning was quiet. Noah had just fallen asleep after his morning feeding, and Laura stood barefoot in the kitchen sipping her coffee while scrolling through her messages. Michael had sent her a photo from his morning hike, sunrise over the ocean. No words, just the image. It said everything. She smiled. These past few weeks had been unexpected, gentle, steady, and more than anything, safe. They hadn't put a name to what they were building. Neither of them had said relationship or love or anything that might scare the moment away. But the connection was undeniable. She felt it every time he texted, "How's Noah today?" She felt it when he called her at night, voice low and calm, asking about her, writing her dreams, the poems she hadn't shown anyone yet. And especially when he listened not just with ears, but with his presence. There were still nights Laura questioned if it was real, if someone like Michael could actually choose someone like her, a woman with baggage, spit-up stains, and unwashed hair. But then came mornings like this one, and it felt possible. She picked up her phone and typed, Laura, thinking of that lemon tart. Want to do lunch tomorrow? Noah's with mom again. The response came 2 seconds later. Michael, it's a date. Same place, I'll book the corner table. She smiled, set the phone down, and walked into Noah's room. He was still asleep, cheeks flushed, lips parted, his little chest rising and falling like he was dreaming of clouds. She leaned down and kissed his forehead. Life wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. And for Laura, that was everything. An hour later, the phone rang. She almost didn't pick up. It was a number she didn't recognize. But something in her chest told her to. Hello, is this Ms. Laura Miller? The voice said. Male, calm, too calm. Yes, who's calling? This is Lieutenant Harris with Naval Medical Center. I'm calling regarding a Michael Langston. You're listed as his emergency contact. Her blood froze. Wait, what? There's been an incident, he said. We can't release full details over the phone, but he was brought in early this morning. He is stable, but an observation for head trauma. What happened? She demanded, her voice cracking. He was hiking alone, according to witnesses. A fall, possibly a seizure. We don't know if it was cardiac-related or neurological. He regained consciousness briefly, but he's currently sedated. Laura was already grabbing her keys. I'm on my way, she said. The hospital smelled like bleach and loneliness. Laura sat in a plastic chair outside Michael's room, her knees shaking, her hands numb. The nurse had let her in only briefly, just long enough to see him lying still in the bed, wires trailing from his chest oxygen cannula in place, his eyes closed. He looked like he was sleeping, too still, too quiet. The man who stood tall in uniform, who protected strangers without hesitation, now lay as vulnerable as a child. Tears welled in her eyes. The doctor approached. He's stable, the woman said gently. We're running scans now. There's no internal bleeding, but we're monitoring him closely. He was lucky someone saw him fall. Did he say anything? Laura whispered. Only one word, the doctor said. She checked her notes. He said your name. Laura pressed her fingers to her lips. That was it. That was all she needed to hear. She didn't leave the hospital for the next 8 hours. Her mom brought Noah in the evening so she could nurse him and cuddle him in the waiting room. but she refused to go home. Around midnight, a nurse came to her. "He's awake," she said. "He's asking for you." Laura stood up so fast her legs nearly gave out. She walked slowly into the room, heart in her throat. Michael turned his head weakly when he heard the door open. "You're here," he whispered. "Of course I am," she said, blinking back tears. "Didn't want you to see me like this." Too late, she choked out, pulling a chair close to his bed. "But I still see you." He tried to smile. "I think I fell for you." Her heart stopped. "What can a remassen in?" He blinked slowly, voice hoarse. "Literally fell, down a cliff. First time I felt my age." Laura laughed through the tears. "You're an idiot," she said. "You scared the hell out of me." "You're still here," he whispered. She nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." 3 days had passed since Michael was admitted to the hospital. Laura hadn't left his side. She slept on a vinyl chair beside his bed, her head resting against the armrest. Noah occasionally curled up beside her when her mom brought him in for short visits. The nurses brought her extra coffee, and the doctor began to refer to her as the guardian angel in room 413. Michael was improving. The tests had confirmed it wasn't a seizure but a sudden drop in blood pressure likely caused by dehydration and exhaustion. He would need rest, care, time, but not surgery, not a farewell. And Laura clung to that like a life preserver. On the fourth morning, Michael was well enough to speak without struggling. Laura was sitting by the window, Noah babbling in her lap. Michael opened his eyes and smiled for the first time in days. "You brought the whole cavalry," he said, his voice scratchy but playful. "You scared us," she replied, brushing his wrist with her thumb. "You scared me." "I know. I almost lost you before I ever had the chance to tell you I wanted you." Michael's breath caught. "Laura, don't," she said softly. "Just listen." She shifted Noah gently into the stroller and walked to his bedside, leaning forward with both hands on the railing. "You don't owe me anything. You don't have to promise me forever. I know life doesn't work that way, not for people like us. We don't get neat endings." Michael blinked, his chest rising with emotion. "But I want this," she continued. "Not because I'm lonely or because I need rescuing. I want this because when I'm with you, I feel like more of myself, not less. I feel brave. I feel like I can take a deep breath again." He stared at her. Then he reached for her hand. "I don't know what I did to deserve you," he whispered, "but I'm not letting go. Not now. Not ever." Noah squealed just then, perfect timing. Laura laughed through her tears. "He approves. He's always been smarter than me." They sat together like that for a long time, hands entwined, foreheads nearly touching. No rings, no contracts. Just two people who had both lived enough to know that love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about staying when things got hard. It was about showing up. Michael was discharged 5 days later. Laura brought him home to her home, not his. He had insisted. And though her apartment was modest and cluttered with toys, he said it was the most peaceful place he'd been in years. He started walking slowly again. He held Noah while sitting on the couch. He read to him. He started cooking dinner, one simple dish at a time, and left post-it notes around the kitchen that said things like, "You are loved and feed this woman. She forgets to eat." Every night before bed, he would touch Laura's cheek and whisper, "I didn't fall just that day on the trail. I've been falling for you since the moment you stood up for yourself and didn't apologize." And every night Laura would answer, "I didn't expect forever, just a chance. You gave me that." A few weeks later, as they sat on the couch watching Noah stack blocks like a tiny engineer, Michael reached into his jacket and pulled out something small. Laura looked over. "What's that?" "A letter," he said. "You wrote me one once. Left it in my notebook. I thought it was time I returned the favor." She blinked, reaching for it with trembling fingers. "Should I read it now?" "Whenever you're ready," he said. "It's just words, but they're yours to keep." She opened it slowly. Inside was one sentence written in his exacting, neat script. "You saved me before I ever knew I needed saving." She covered her mouth with her hand, tears welling again. "Michael, I meant every word." Outside the window, the sky began to darken, but the apartment glowed with soft light and quiet peace. There was no proposal, no music swelling in the background, just love, raw, real, and earned. And that was enough.